Okay, good morning. Welcome, bienvenidos, willkommen, bienvenue to everybody. I'm Marjorie Burren, a longtime Unitarian and longtime member of this congregation. I'll be your service leader again today. We are located on the lands of the Chichimeca, Otomi, and Nuaja people. Their descendants are still with us to this day. And we are making community by Zoom across Mexico, Canada, and the US, where some members are on the lands of the Navajo, the Hopi, the Apache, as with my home in Phoenix, Arizona. So let's honor our indigenous ancestors. And we're especially happy to welcome back today our guest, Reverend Louise Green, who lives in Washington, D.C., where she is minister of the Congregational Care at All Souls Unitarian. And this is the third of the 4 services that she'll be leading us in. It's been a great honor and privilege to be working with her, and I'm really delighted to see her back. So the topic of the sermon today is the power of Sankofa. The word Sankofa comes from the Akan people of Ghana, and it literally means to go back and get it. Reverend Green will explore how we often need to look back in order to move forward. And today, Reverend Green will examine ancestral lineage, the power, the gifts, and the harm of generational relationships. So, quite a few announcements today. I feel like the principal in the auditorium. Remember we were kids? Oh no, but I'm afraid we have to do it. So today, after the service, is our much anticipated membership meeting, so things will work a little differently. Please note that after the service, those of you on Zoom will need to leave the Zoom meeting and sign back on with a different Zoom link for the meeting. And of course, that meeting will be shared with you on Zoom. Hope everybody's clear on Zoom. Yay, hello over there. Those who are here with us at the Aldea will have, you also have special instructions. We ask that you quickly exit the sala and re-enter by the membership table where you'll be confirmed as a voting member. And then after re-entering, you're invited for coffee and cookies. So it won't be immediately after the service. And please try to move along expeditiously so we can get the meeting started on time. Thank you. Now, we have visitors here with us today. And please stand as I call your name. Cheryl from Michigan. There she is, lovely, welcome. Yolanda and Dennis from Colorado. Thank you, welcome. And mi amigo, Jose Luis from Mexico City. And your wife? Welcome, welcome, thank you. Okay, and these are concerns. Do we have any other visitors here today that are new? Please stand, no? Well, thank you for coming. And we're much more welcoming than we'll be today, unfortunately. Come back, because we are, but today we have to shuffle things along. Let's see. Okay. Do we have any other visitors on Zoom? Please type in your name and where you are in the chat box. I don't see any others. Okay. So we do record our Sunday services. Just go to our website, UUFSMA.org, click on services at the top, and then previous services. And while you're on the website, please check out some of the various activities that sponsored by the fellowship and information on how to become a member. And I invite you to take advantage of the many opportunities that are open to you to deepen your connection to our fellowship. There's weekday conversations, a games group on Thursday, there's a Friday morning Buddhist group, and occasionally circles cenas, and they're all just wonderful. And there are many hands and bodies needed to produce these services every week, so please volunteer when you can and when you're willing and able. Thank you. Louise.
Good morning, everybody. I invite you to take a deep breath and settle in. Whatever you're bringing for the rest of the day, to be here now. Our reading this morning is on courage, because it takes courage to look back. These are the words of the UU minister Marisol Caballero. Courage requires both vulnerability and careful strategy. Courage is not demanding safety when confronting the annoyance of having one's long-held answers questioned. It is incompatible with despair. Courage is not becoming defensive or insisting upon being viewed as an individual when the privileges of membership in a dominant group are brought to light. Rather, courage recognizes that growth insists on a willingness to be utterly transformed. Courage does not require perfection from us, or airtight plans, or even expertise. Courage requires taking great risks while stepping into the unknown. We light our chalice this morning, and our chalice lighter arrives as a symbol of inner courage against all odds. We each bear the gifts and the histories that have shaped our lives and have the power to transform ourselves and our communities. Blessed be. We will rise now as willing and able for our opening hymn, 352, Find a Stillness.
And now I invite you to stay standing if you're willing and join us in reciting our covenant. I will do the English and Paula is going to be joining me in Spanish. We respect the interdependent web of life and work for a just and peaceful world. We encourage the search for truth and meaning, strive for compassion in our relationships, and seek values that will benefit our lives and the lives of others. This is our covenant.
Respetamos todos los estilos de vida dentro de su red interdependiente. Trabajamos por un mundo justo y pacífico. Alentamos la búsqueda de la verdad y la comprensión total. Nos esforzamos por mantener compasión en nuestras relaciones y buscamos valores que beneficien nuestras vidas y las vidas de los demás. Este es nuestro convenio.
You may all be seated. Sorry.
Each week, we light candles for those people and situations that are on our hearts today. And you may email Tom Raciello with your requests for this list, or fill out a card when you come in, or put something in the chat if you are on Zoom. First, a candle of concern for Stu Hammer, who flew to Texas on medical transport for hip surgery after a fall. Stu is doing well. Husband Al is also there, and they may be on Zoom today if you're here already. Hello. Another candle of healing for Linda Soren, who fell Wednesday, also broke her hip, and is in the hospital for surgery and treatment. I was emailing with her this morning. She did have surgery yesterday. It was kind of a complex hip repair, so she's working through the aftermath at the moment. She's in Hospital Joya. A birthday candle of joy for Liz Stone, who celebrated her 86th birthday this week. And she wrote a thank you, too, that she is so grateful to have her daughter Lauren here to assist in her care. So, our continued healing thoughts to Susan McDonald, who is doing very well in her recovery and may be here before too long. More on that next week. Joan Wolfe, also still in chemotherapy. Judy Rosenthal, Donna Schubricks, all who remain in medical treatment or care. And now let's see, any cards from the congregation? Yes. A huge concern and sadness for all the people of Maui, especially my friends in, I may not pronounce this correctly, Lehana, who lost their homes, businesses, and everything else. Judith Jenya. Let's see if we have anything here. Not seeing anything in the chat. We light a candle each week for the people of Ukraine suffering in the ongoing invasion by Russia. A candle of love for all those involved in the community of Abba House and Celaya, the migrant residents, the staff, and volunteers, and special thanks to Stan for taking me and Francois this week. And now a candle for all those who are holding unspoken names and situations in their hearts, either in this room or in the Zoom congregation. We hold all of this in the great care that we have for one another and the wider world, and in the loving accompaniment of this community. You may also come forward during what will be this week singing Spirit of Life to light a candle for what you bring today. We will remain seated for that hymn and sing it first in English and then in Spanish.
I was instructed last week that I came on too soon. I had to let that wonderful music sink in. Thank you, Paula, as always, beautiful. So our reading today is from Caste, The Origins of Our Discontents by the American journalist Isabel Wilkerson. And on a personal note, it is a wonderful book, and I urge all of you, if you haven't read it, and you're at all remotely interested in the origins of systemic racism, it's a brilliant and insightful book. She describes racism in the United States and elsewhere as an aspect of a caste system, which is characterized by hierarchy, inclusion, and exclusion, and purity. And in this reading, we hear her analogy between an old house with dangerous structural issues and the toxic systems of white oppression. The owner of an old house knows that whatever you are ignoring will never go away. Whatever is lurking will fester whether you choose to look or not. Ignorance is no protection from the consequences of an action. Whatever you are wishing away will gnaw at you until you gather the courage to face what you would rather not see. The owner of an old house, we in the developed world are like homeowners who inherited a house on a piece of land that is beautiful on the outside, but heaving and contracting over generations. Cracks patched, but the deeper ruptures waved away for decades, centuries even. Our immediate ancestors may have had nothing to do with it, but here we are, the current occupants of a property with stressed cracks and bowed walls and fissures built into the foundation. We are the heirs to whatever is right or wrong with it, and any further deterioration is, in fact, on our hands.
The Sankofa, that mythical bird, is flying forwards. I think we're about to show the slide of the Sankofa, in case you don't know what I'm talking about. There it is. The head is always turning back, looking at the past. Go back and get it, says the phrase of the Akan people in the region of Ghana. Bring back the gift. And there's an egg in the mouth of the Sankofa bird that represents gems of knowledge which bring wisdom to the next generations. As a West African proverb says, it is not wrong to go back for that which you have forgotten. That's good on the slide. So we all have the opportunity to seek beneath layers of history, to remember the old stories of ancestors and institutions. And in these days, I would say that we have an obligation to do so, an ethical, spiritual obligation. We are heirs to complex tales about our own countries, about our particular family lineage. And we long for transformation, both collective and individual, but we can't go forward if we don't go back, Sankofa, to get the stories of our own ancestral and institutional lines. Let me acknowledge from the beginning that there are certain lines that are much more traceable than others, usually in lineage eventually identified as white, through ancestors that are not subject to the cruelty of slavery, imprisonment, indentured service, the erasures of colonialism. And those of us with the most privilege over generations, including the WASPs, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants like me, have this strong tendency to tell stories that focus on the pride of lineage. Does anybody else have this in their family? We leave out some key details. We omit inconvenient facts. We tend to airbrush weight. And as Isabel Wilkerson tells us, whatever you are wishing away will gnaw at you until you gather the courage to face what you would rather not see. I'm very interested in family stories and the many plots that thicken in my ancestral lines. There are always gifts from our ancestors, no doubt. I'm grateful. And we are often damaged and witness to that damage. I've pondered this range of characters in my own family tangle of race, caste, whiteness. And the deaths of my grandparents and my parents took me into journeys of looking at old pictures and papers. There have been oral stories as well. What was celebrated, what was omitted, what was named and claimed. And so today I'm just going to follow a few threads involving religion in particular in this complex movie of my family. It's an example of what we might each uncover in very different ways when engaged in this process of Sankofa, looking back with honesty and courage to get what we need to move forward. One thing is for sure, ancestors are complicated, more complicated than originally presented, just like the humans that we all are. So let's start with my maternal great-grandmother, Edmonia Bell Sale. She was an intrepid woman who went to China in the late 1800s, sailing alone to be a teacher and a missionary. Near Shanghai, she met my great-grandfather, George Washington Marshall, who was a hospital administrator and a missionary as well. They married, they had 3 children who all grew up there. My grandfather, Robert, and his siblings, my great uncle, Larry, and great aunt Betty. They'll come back in the movie later. So in family stories, we always lauded this great faith tradition, the courage to travel far and offer religious service. My grandfather, Robert, admired Chinese culture and language, beautiful art collected while the family was there. We celebrated the Asian regions of the world and the richness of very long civilizations. Great-grandmother Edmonia inspired me as I decided to become a minister. I appreciated her bravery, her independence. She was breaking out in a way that was unusual for a woman of her time, leaving the South alone to go to China, against the wishes of her father, I will add in. And yet, as far as I can recall, I think this is astonishing, nothing was ever said about the religious dominance of explicit efforts for conversion, about the deep bias that considered Western Christianity superior to all Chinese forms of spirituality and practice. This only became clear to me over time, and as I was in divinity school, I was actually ordained in a different denomination, the most progressive of the mainline Christian, United Church of Christ, and they have a strong critique of doing this kind of mission work uninvited. And eventually I migrated to the UU world now 20 years ago, where we embrace many wisdom traditions and offer global solidarity by invitation only. One day, my great aunt Lucy, who was the second wife of my great uncle Larry, called and said, "Louise, I just realized that your great grandmother Edmonia was a thief." I said, "What do you mean? Like, this is part of the story I never heard before." Lucy replied, "All that Chinese art that we have in the family, it may have been taken from new Christian converts in China." Lucy said, "I'm reading Edmonia's papers, and she talks about this as a practice to help focus religious devotion on Jesus. We have no idea," she said, "whether our family art is what they confiscated or treasures they actually purchased." Okay, I'm visualizing this red and gold lacquer chest that my mom had for her wedding, this brocade wall hanging of a Chinese sage and birds, these paintings of swallows and bamboo, one I have in my house, and much more. Who knows where it all came from? My complicated grandmother, great-grandmother, Edmonia. Well, there's more. This startling call came from Lucy, who was Edmonia's daughter-in-law and descended from Norwell, Massachusetts Unitarians. Now, in retirement, this great aunt by marriage moved from Mendocino to live in Maryland. I got to know her well, and we were the lone UUs in our extended family tree of mostly Presbyterians and a sprinkle of Episcopalians. She was a writer with a very independent progressive voice, a great laugh, a dry sense of humor. Lucy was a feisty spiritual humanist, and with some very wry skepticism of clergy and congregations, something we both shared, actually. Lucy was the second wife of my great uncle Larry, who caused ripples by being in a relationship with Lucy while separated but not divorced from his first wife. She worked in his department of physics at UC Berkeley, and so he was a tenured professor in a relationship with an office staff person, a younger woman. And no one ever commented on this part. And it was not what bothered Edmonia, Larry's mother, the most. When Lucy first went to meet Larry's mother, she was in Montreat, North Carolina, in a Presbyterian home for former missionaries. And my great-grandmother opened the door and said, "Hello, Lucy. Thank God you're not a papist." And Lucy was so startled, she couldn't even sort out what she was saying, and realized later she meant, "I can deal with a Unitarian, but not a Catholic." Yikes, complicated Edmonia. So Lucy's marriage to great uncle Larry would lead to a family split, a severe one. I didn't know them or their children for the entire first 35 years of my life. My grandfather, Robert, went to college in the US, and he eventually became a Presbyterian elder, a congregational leader in North Carolina. He was very critical of Lucy as the second wife and Larry's actions leading to divorce. This resulted in a literal religious shunning, which impacted an entire generation. My complicated grandfather, Robert, had some very big judgment. And when I went to his funeral in North Carolina, my grandfather's sister, who was Great Aunt Betty from Manhattan, also grew up in China, told me a shocking thing. At that funeral, I learned we had cousins in New York, where my sister and I were both living, and we had a lot in common. They were Lucy and Larry's children from the second marriage. We discovered an entire family had been cut off because of the controversial affair and divorce. My parents only knew them minimally. I asked my mother, why didn't you ever say anything about them? And she was like, well, it never came up. And which is so typical of stories we omit. The same religious drive that had inspired exploration and service resulted in the building of very firm walls that shut people out. Okay, one more story, I promise. My ancestral heritage also goes back in 4 different lines to Scotland on maternal and paternal sides, which again is a privilege to be able to trace. Our famous direct ancestor is John Knox. He was lauded in our Presbyterian family and considered a prestigious forebear. He was the founder of the Scottish Reform movement in 1560 that led to more egalitarian Presbyterian forms of community. He was a big advocate of educational reform for the poor and started many, many schools. And at the same time, he was a very punitive Calvinist. He was a harsh critic of Catholicism, and he was a leader in uprooting religious orders in Scotland. So last August, on the island of Iona, Scotland, I stood in the remains of a women's abbey where only the name of the last abbess is known. It's as if this history was erased. This is because in the 1560s, John Knox, my ancestor, destroyed that female-led Catholic community and forced the residents to workhouses. The pain rising up from that land seemed to be present even in the old stones, even as wildflowers were covering the ruins. Ugh, my complicated ancestor, John Knox, reformer and leader, misogynist, and crusader. You might see a somewhat malignant theme here. Religious white people who are generous in some ways and harshly judgmental in others. Devoted Christians who wanted to be of service, who at the same time were causing harm, embodied this misogynistic power and practiced a kind of racial domination. Family members who upheld the institutions of this white Protestant supremacy in religious life, and at the same time offered strong leadership within their ranks for hundreds of years. So the power of Sankofa is to go back and know in order to be different as we fly forward. To understand a complex family heritage, the good, the bad, the ugly, and appreciate the many gifts received. So I have this DNA of ministers and missionaries, elders, public servants, and this has been both a blessing and a burden. It is therefore up to me and my generation to heal the divisions in my family, and more importantly, beyond, to practice inclusion and humility in religious life, to build spaces that practice religious and racial equity, and then to break free of these received forms and create new pathways, as Unitarians have done for centuries. We all have our searches to do. We each can find the stories that bring gifts, along with naming what has caused the great harm. So back for a minute to Isabel Wilkerson, who makes another analogy. Looking beneath the history of one's country in the history of the family or the congregation or the church, I would add, is like learning that alcoholism or depression runs in one's family, or that suicide has occurred more often than might be usual. You don't ball up in a corner with guilt or shame, quite the opposite. You don't, if you are wise, forbid any mention of them. You educate yourself. You talk to people who have been through it and specialists who have researched it. You might pray over it, meditate over it. Then you take the precautions to protect yourself and succeeding generations and work to ensure, Wilkerson says, that these things, whatever they are, don't happen again. If we don't look, we can't know. If we don't know, we perpetuate the myths of family lineage that so often contain the partial truths or the outright lies, the harm which occurred and the toxicity of omission. Each of my ancestors was full of qualities to honor, but all were flawed human beings, blinded by a kind of narrowness of religious and racial ideologies in the structures of white privilege. We all have a chance to heal ancestral wounds, to be the generations that rectify the old wrongs. And we must know the complex history to be the change in order to be part of the liberation of all. This is necessary for our own growth, for the evolution of our Unitarian Universalist faith, and for each of our congregations that are in covenant together as well. And so may we have the courage to fly into the future using the power of Sankofa to learn and to grow. May it be so. Amen.
Wow. Thank you again, Louise, for another wonderful sermon. So now it's time for our offering. I urge you to give generously as much as is comfortable for you. And I would just like to remind you all that every peso, every dollar counts. Ever come back from a trip to a foreign country and you find you have all those coins you don't know what to do with, you can't really buy anything? Well, years ago, I was coming back from one of my biannual trips to England to see my ancestors, my relatives, and British Airways announced that if you had any coins and you didn't know what to do with them, they would hand out envelopes and collect them. And they called the program Spare Change. And I see a lot of other airlines have adopted it. Well, I recently read that over the years, collecting all those coins, those pennies or shillings or whatever, they have collected tens of millions of dollars that they have donated to charity. So, no matter how small or large your contribution is today, and even if you've already made your pledge and your donation, if you can find it in your hearts to add a few more pesos, we'd all be very grateful. Thank you for your generosity. Thank you. So let's join our voices together in song. Hymn number 298, Wake Now My Senses. We're going to sing verses 1 through 4, and I invite you to stand as you're willing and able. Be seated. Thank you. That was very spirited singing. That was lovely. All those angel voices singing. So just a few reminders, please, in preparation for today's membership meeting for our friends on Zoom. Hi there. Please exit your Zoom meeting after this service and sign back in the different Zoom link for members to attend and vote at our membership meeting. Check the chat for the Zoom link. For those attending in person today, following the service, please gather your things and exit quietly and expeditiously. And then you can check in at the membership table, which I think is back there, yes? Out there. Gracias. Thank you, Ellie. Thank you. Then you can go to that table and enter as a voting member. Please leave your name tag on for the meeting. You'll be greeted with coffee and cookies after you re-enter, which should be inducement enough, I think. And thanks for helping us by quickly exiting after today's postlude. Thank you all. Thanks for attending. Thank you.
We do have closing words and a postlude before you expeditiously move. People are so obedient. They're like, we're out. Yeah. And I just want to say, if you're visiting, this is very unusual. Like, please return where we usually saunter over to coffee and cookies right after the meeting. And this is just to get the logistics going. We'll just have one more moment of reflection before we up and move. This is the final words by Barbara Peskin. Because of those who came before, we are. In spite of their failing, we believe. Because of and in spite of the horizons of their vision, we too dream. Let us go remembering to praise, to live in the moment, to live mightily, and to bow to the mystery. Amen. and a moment of music.